And so the Democrats have been blaming and scolding and shaming people who vote for third-party candidates, and in particular the Green Party, as well as the candidates of the Green Party themselves, probably since time in memoriam, but certainly since my whole lifetime, or at least since the 2000 election, when Bush won narrowly against Gore. And one of the reasons for that, the Democratic Party asserts, is that people voted for Ralph Nader rather than Al Gore, and that kicked the election to Bush. And they've said the same thing in the 2016 election, a lot more duviously, because Hillary lost by a margin that was greater than the Stein votes. But they blamed Jill Stein and the Green Party for kicking Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to Donald Trump, the Rust Belt for Trump, and now we're stuck with Trump. And so the Green Party has destroyed America, first in 2000, then again in 2016, and so we really need to stop them. And unfortunately, there is a kernel or a piece of truth to that assertion, because even though I don't like it, there is truth to the statement that if you take a vote away from Gore, that's equivalent to giving a vote for Bush. So if you prefer Gore, but you decide to vote for a candidate who really has no chance realistically of being elected, which is unfortunately true for any third-party candidate in the moment, that is equivalent to voting for Gore. I guess the analogous situation would be if there was some right-wing candidate that had pulled Bush, votes, 1% of votes away from Bush, and then Gore was elected. We'd be pretty happy about it, and that would be effectively a good thing for the progressive wing of the country. And in contrast, what we had was the progressive wing's most progressive candidate inadvertently assisting the disaster that was the Bush administration and the Trump administration. And unfortunately, that's true. That's called the spoiler effect, and it sucks. It's the reason that I just voted for Joe Biden and supported Joe Biden. And it's going to be one of the major impediments that stops, the two-party system from ever being dismantled or taken on, is the fact that we have that spoiler effect. So the Democrats, year after year, will just complain and blame and talk about the spoiler effect and shame any progressive or left-wing person who considers not supporting their really pretty terrible candidates in the general election, and say, like, do you want Trump to be elected? Do you want Bush to be elected? Do you want Hitler to be elected? Well, if not, you have to vote for the Democrat. And there's some truth to it. I've had to swallow my pride and vote for these terrible candidates time after time, but I don't like it. But the question is, are the Democrats really sincere when they complain about the spoiler effect? Because if they are, you'd think that they would actually take steps to alleviate it, so that people, so that they wouldn't have to worry about, a few 100,000 people voting in each cycle for a candidate which they prefer more, at the expense of the values which are shared with the Democrats, and for the benefit of the Republicans and the conservatives, which neither of them agree with. You'd think that there would be common ground in rectifying that situation, finding out some way to do elections in which people are able to, support the candidates that they support without aiding the candidates which they oppose and the ideas which they oppose. There actually is a very easy, well-understood, intuitive solution to that, which could be easily implemented across the country. And it's called ranked choice voting, and it's pretty simple. And so it just says that if you have a number of candidates in an election, let's just say we have 3 for this example. So we have the Republican, the Democrat, and then the Green Party spoiler, or it could be a Libertarian candidate or a conservative candidate, or you could have 4 or 5 candidates. But in this example, we just have these 3. Your top priority would be the Green Party candidate, the Ralph Nader. Your second preferred candidate would be Al Gore, and your least preferred candidate would be George Bush. The way it works is that when casting your vote, you just rank what your top priorities are. So you would put a 1 by Ralph Nader, a 2 by Al Gore, and then I guess a 3 by George Bush, or you just leave it blank. And if your top priority does not receive at least is not one of the top 2 candidates, then their vote goes to the next candidate until it finally reaches somebody that is within the top 2 candidates in the first round of voting. And so essentially what that means is that everybody that was supportive of Ralph Nader would have their vote go to Al Gore, while still being able to express what their actually preferences are in terms of policy, and not being browbeaten into supporting some candidate which they actually don't support. And it would allow for for third-party candidates and democracy, therefore, to flourish and not be stomped out at the beginning because of the nature of the two-party system. And so it should benefit, in theory, both the green parties of the world and the third parties and the democratic system, as well as benefiting the Democratic Party, the small d Democratic Party at the moment, by making sure that anybody that is supporting the third-party candidates but still prefers them to the Republicans or the other large party would still get their votes to the Democratic candidate. And ranked choice voting actually passed in the state of Maine a couple of years ago. It's been implemented statewide, despite the fact that pretty much no national Democrats of any note ever, say that they support it or take any steps to actually implement it and alleviate the situation, which they've spent years and years excoriating Jill Stein voters and Ralph Nader and the Green Party and blaming and castigating them for, which was the election of Trump and Bush, rather than actually take any steps to implement something that would actually affect change and benefit or rectify the situation which they claim to be so concerned about. They would rather continue to just point fingers and scold than actually implement anything. I think it's for a pretty clear reason. They are not fundamentally concerned about getting out Donald Trump or improving people's lives, and by them I mean the mainstream Democrats that are in power, the Pelosi's and the Schumers. They're more concerned about maintaining their own perch at the top of the hierarchy within liberal America and the Democratic Party, and making sure that that's not ever threatened. And one of the threats to it is the third-party candidates, or people who don't support the Democratic Party, people like myself who think that they have sold out and have implemented trade policies and foreign policies and tax policies and Wall Street regulations and environmental policies, which have been very, very bad for the majority of people for a long time, and it's been consistently going down. But one of the only ways that they're able to maintain that support is the threat of a worse alternative, which is personified in Trump and Bush. And it's kind of worked, but when it comes to implementing a ranked choice voting system, which would alleviate that threat, which they hold at the gun to the head of the progressives whose support they need to win these elections, they decide not to do that because that would take away one of their biggest weapons in scolding and blaming. And so it was on the ballot in Massachusetts, which is a very blue state, despite having a Republican governor, but he's like the most liberal Republican left in America. It's an extremely blue state, Massachusetts, but it didn't pass, and there was no real push by the Democrats to get it to pass statewide. And it's for exactly the reasons I said. They're not concerned about improving the conditions for people on the ground. They are much more concerned about maintaining their leverage over the progressive left and maintaining their status in Washington and at the top of hierarchies of liberal America. And so I'd say we need to implement that. We need to pass it despite the efforts of the Democrats to ignore and or potentially even suppress it. But it does show a lot about why the Democrats have gotten to the point that they are and who the leadership of that party is.